Well, in the interest of running on-time meetings, as we're wont to do, I have the great pleasure to introduce Dr. Mack, who's professor and chair of neurosurgery at USC, who's going to be presenting on our topic for today, which is making a career development plan. So I will go ahead and let him introduce his panel, and thank you all for joining us.
So thank you, Melanie, and it's great to be here. We have a great panel today. We have three panelists. I see two of them on already. The first is Peter Can. Peter, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, it's Peter Ken. I'm the chair of neurosurgery at University of Texas Medical Branch, cerebrovascular neurosurgeon. Good friends of Bill Costas. I think Jen is on the call too. So thanks for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, and Costas, you want to go next? Costas Hedgepanias?
Yeah, thank you, Bill, and welcome everybody. I am the vice chair at University of Pittsburgh, and I wear several hats, but I'm a neurosurgical oncologist and also run a lab. So happy to be a part of this tonight.
Excellent. And third, Jen Straley from WashU. Jen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Jen Straley. I'm a pediatric neurosurgeon at WashU. I also have a lab there, both basic science and clinical and translational research. And thank you so much, Bill, for inviting me to be part of this panel.
Well, thanks. This is this is a great panel that I think everybody can benefit immensely from at all stages of career, everything from student to potential K awardee to mentor. And the way I thought we would do this session today is I would give a brief overview on some of the nuts and bolts of writing a career development plan for a career development award. And then we would just have a discussion, questions and a discussion with our panel, both regarding their experience with career development activities and plans for a K award or other scientific awards, and just career development in general. So I figured I would kick off and introduce this concept. I put together a few slides just to begin, and then we'll break off into a conversation about it. So the point of this is to introduce the concept of the career development plan as it's required in an NIH grant, but this is pretty symbolic of just the career development plan in general. I'm going to go through the nuts and bolts of writing this and that section in the NIH application for those that are interested in making that. And each of the panelists here has a fair amount of experience or a vast experience, both mentoring K awardees, writing their own K award career development plan, and helping others, and also evaluating these plans on various study sections. So let me proceed. First, I wanted to introduce what this part of the application is. And this falls under this section that I highlighted in red, candidate information and goals for career development and research strategy. So this whole section is 12 pages, and many people's career development plans fall in the 3 to 6 page range, depending on what type of granting mechanism that they're applying for, whether it's a K12 or a K08 or some other type of career development plan. But it's super important to keep in mind that whatever mechanism it is that someone's applying for, the page limits have to be understood and observed. So keeping this within the right amount of words and pages is important. I put together just an overview slide, and I think these are phrases that come up all the time. I think it's important on these career development plans and the way of thinking of one's career development to be gap-based and structured. So what that means is when you come into writing something like this or thinking about the construct, it's what type of skills do I have and what do I need to gain in terms of training, which brings to the next line, which is that training should be specific and necessary. If somebody has all the training they need to put together a career development grant or award, they probably shouldn't be applying for that mechanism. They should be applying for something more advanced, an R01 or an R21. So it's important that we include things that are necessary and specific in these grants and not include things that, one might think looks good or fills the page. And that's where the gaps come in. It's what's the training gap and how do you address that? Another point would be this should leverage the mentorship. Every gap that one has should be addressed through not just hands-on mentorship, but we'll discuss later some other activities. But the mentorship is critical. If you go from start to finish on a career development award, by the time someone's done with this, the K12 that we've talked about for the NRCDP or an independent career development award, K08 or K23, the applicant should be ready for independence at that point. That doesn't mean learning stops. It doesn't mean mentorship stops. It just means you're ready to launch into independence. When you're actually writing up this section of the grant, tables, figures, diagrams, very helpful. But as I referred to before with the specificity, the more advanced grant that one applies for, the less room there is to be vague and talk about training through coursework or name courses and not give specifics. So I'll go on to the next slide. The way I think of the career development plan is there's three parts of it. And the first is the candidate's background. This is where you're talking about one's journey and their background and the skills that they've attained up to the point of their K award. That's where they're starting. They should have a commitment to either translational, basic science, or clinical research, depending on the mechanism that they're applying. And there should be some research effort or productivity to date. You're going to include preliminary data in your grant. This is where you include your preliminary research experiences, whether it's working in a lab or the training that you got. And here's how you lay out what you don't need to learn. If you have a PhD or if you have an advanced degree in statistics or epidemiology, that might not be where you need to focus on your career development award. Likewise, if you've done a lot of a specific type of technique or technology, that might not be where you need to focus. So we like to relate the prior training to the career goals at this part of the section and indicate the potential that this person has for independent investigator status. You're obviously not there yet, but you want to show potential. The second part is where I think one would lay out their career development trajectory in terms of their long-term training goals and their short-term training goals and their long-term research strategy. So when I advise on this or when I think about it, you put forth the gaps first. What gaps do you have in your knowledge? And what are going to be your training goals? How are you going to fill those gaps? How's that going to get you to independence? So you work through a gap and a training goal, and those should match up somewhat with the aims that you put forth in your grant. Part 3, once you've developed those training goals, is what are the activities? How are you going to get the career development and the training activities? So this is a systematic plan, and as I mentioned, is gap-based. You integrate the needs for that gap and organize them in terms of mentorship that you might need or one might need, hands-on mentorship, didactic mentorship and activities through coursework, leveraging institutional resources. And that didactic activities could be specific classes, or could be seminars, I'll mention on the next slide, or grant writing activities. But each one should match up with one of your gaps and probably one of your specific aims in your research plan. I mentioned at the end, usually this part 3 of the career development plan includes a statement of 50%, 6%, 6-person months that you're committed to your training grant. That is 75% for the rest of the fields of medicine, but the NINDS allows neurosurgery to commit 50% time or 6-person months. And it's good, although your mentor, or rather your chair, has to document that in their letter. It's good that the candidate documents it as well in this part of the letter. If you actually look on the NIH website where it talks about these training grants, it does suggest participation in journal clubs, grant writing, seminars, national, international meetings, and each of those have their own reasoning. The journal clubs should be obviously related to what you're doing on the grant and involve the people that are mentoring you. Grant writing is self-explanatory, and national meetings give you an opportunity to put in context what you're doing in the larger picture of your scientific endeavors. A training table is very helpful. A lot of people organize this. They'll even list a gap or a career trajectory on the left, and then your specific aim that pertains to that in the next column, and then what mentorship you're going to get and from whom, and what class you're going to take if you're going to take any didactic classes. And the didactic classes, one big mistake I see is just listing classes. That doesn't help. It's what are you going to gain from a specific class? What technique, what technology, what information, etc. A timeline is helpful, often in visual form, and this should hit on issues like when are you going to meet with your mentor, both individually and your whole group of mentors? What is the frequency? What is the time that you're going to do that? Are you going to have an advisory committee? Again, this is a suggestion that's come straight from the NIH. It's helpful to have some training in experimental design and statistics that you weave into this. And most importantly, probably is the work you do on your mentorship with your mentor on this particular part of the career development plan. It's very obvious to people reviewing this if it's written completely by the applicant and hasn't been looked over at all by the mentor. It's very helpful to get senior visibility and input on this. So finally, I would just leave with a slide that talks about the pitfalls that I've seen in reviewing these and writing these. First, I kind of mentioned already, including unnecessary training. When you're putting together a plan like this, nobody wants to see that you've overdone it with coursework that is not pertinent to your specific training, or you have, 13 mentors involved, death by mentorship, where it's not, everybody likes to have a good mentor team and needs to focus on each of the points that are pertinent to the grant. But there's no reason for unnecessary training. Likewise with irrelevant activities. We focus on the coursework. Whether the coursework has to be right for the level of the applicant who's proposing it. If it's somebody who has good training and is suggesting doing an introductory class, there's probably no use to that. Whereas if you are trying to pick up a new skill and you don't have a lot of background in it, proposing a lot of advanced classes that aren't focused exactly on what you do. There's an example that was actually given, I think it was in a talk that I heard or on the NIH website. If you're doing MRI imaging, you don't need to know everything about the physics of the MRI that you're doing. You need to be a clinical translational scientist who understands enough to interact with the mentors. Now, on the flip side, if your focus is in MRI imaging and you need to know everything about that, then an advanced physics course in that type of tool or advanced imaging is important. Most importantly, it's the career development, it's the mentorship. So you do have to balance the amount of didactic coursework and seminars and travel to conference with the actual mentorship that you're getting from your mentors in the lab, working on the specific aims. And I think I don't know what's too much time on one activity or another. It's a balance that I think you just have to achieve when you're proposing and when you're thinking about how you're going to organize your 3 years or 5 years, whichever time frame this grant is going to occur in. So that is my brief overview, and I'll stop sharing there. I wanted to go through that just to put out the bones on how these career development plans are constructed for an NIH grant and how a lot of us think about career development in general. But I think more importantly, I wanted to involve the panel and hear from these experts in terms of how either they went through and did this or how they help their mentees or their advisees on developing a career development plan. So maybe we can start with Jen. Jen has a lot of expertise on both ends of this. In your experience, Jen, from having done this yourself for your own training and then have mentored numerous other folks. What do you take away as the real
Yeah.
important parts of this plan?
Well, I think really everything you laid out was excellent, and thank you for that overview. I think that spending a significant amount of time on the career development plan up front is super helpful. What I see and what I probably did was I waited till the end and then was like, oh, I did, I have the science done. Oh, and now let me think about the career development plan at the 11th hour. Probably not the best idea. And so with the K grants, the committee really does look just as much in the career development plan section as they do the science. And perhaps even it may be more important than the science. So I would start in earnest on your career development plan using all the various pearls that Bill outlined to really focus in on it and use your mentors. Meet with your mentors. It's not something that you necessarily need to come up with on your own, but really meeting with them early, coming up with a draft just along with your science drafts, making sure that you've put as much thought into that as you have the science. I see people, sort of putting it together at the last second, and that's where I think you may run into trouble, and involving your mentors.
And yeah, I would agree, Jen. Folks say that kind of 1/3 of the grant is evaluated upon by the career development plan, and maybe 1/3 the science. I would say it might even be more for these career development plans. So a well-polished section this is an investment in a researcher that the NIH or whatever agency is evaluating is going to give a lot of money to. So it's important that the plan is really well thought out. Kostas, how about in your experience, learning lessons, pitfalls, and mentoring people through this, evaluating these?
Yeah, so I mean, all these points are great. When I read through these, you really look at how it's written, and the worst thing you could do is cut and paste. Applicants get together K awards that have been funded. They find them from investigators, they get passed along, and then they realize that the career development plan is something that they could just put together, as Jen mentioned, relatively quickly. And as you're hearing from us now, that is not the case. You cannot cut and paste a successful K award career development plan from someone else into your plan. It will definitely be noticed. This plan is specific to you. What are your gaps in your training, as Bill mentioned, that you need to get up to speed with in order for your scientific proposal to be successful? I mean, and there's more to that, right? It's your personal and professional development. How is that going to occur during your 5-year K award? Your mentor has to meet with you regularly. You have to detail those meetings, and you may have multiple mentors. These things are quite important. I do think that, I like to see the career development plan have a little bit meat in its proposal, in terms of, you probably should have something like a biostats thing, scientific rigor and methodology. And those are the types of things that we kind of learn along the way, but it only makes you better when you kind of take that stuff. But don't propose stuff that you're not going to do. The reviewers are going to sniff it out, and you will get penalized, because this is a very important part of the K application. Very extremely important, that you really have to think about ahead of time, in addition to the scientific portion of the grant.
Yeah, I think a couple really important points in Kostas's discussion there. One is that I think I mentioned it a little bit, but as he said, there's specific things such as biostats, such as rigor, and different things in different people's proposals, that everything that you don't know how to do well, you should have mentorship in. And that guides how your mentorship team is constructed. And it's very, very infrequent that somebody has a single mentor and can cover everything these days in science with that. So it's important to look at that. And I would also reiterate the point that no two plans are identical or even terribly similar. You can't fit somebody else's training into your plan. You can certainly use ideas from other people, but it's going to be highly tailored, and it's expected that it's really in sync with your proposal and the aims of your proposal. As I mentioned before, relating each aim that you have to a gap in knowledge, specific mentorship, didactics if it's appropriate, and really taking the reviewer or the audience through that. Peter, you've mentored a lot of people and successfully and probably reviewed a lot of these grants. What's your thinking on the high points? What's most important to you?
No, thanks, Bill. I actually have a different experience. Like, I mean, unlike many on the panel, I didn't go through the K program myself. So I actually learned a lot about the process when I see other people do it and I talk to them. And I think, like I start off with the more independent grants of the NIH. And I think to everyone's point that the biggest thing that struck me is that, for the independent grants, you always spend all your time in the research strategy. The other stuff, you kind of see when the deadline is and you kind of quickly put it together. But I think this grant, when I talk to people, who are going through it, I mean, they asked me to mentor them, but actually they're teaching me a lot about that. I think to Jen's point, to your point, the cost is the opposite. Like the mentorship part of it is like 50% of it. Like that's kind of what I see. Maybe to a point, Bill, more than that, they're like 50% of it. And also, unlike the independent grants, where I think a lot of that stuff, like you said, is transferable, right? You want to look at like animal vertebrate section or data transferring, and often just copy or borrow your own grants or other grants to just plug that in. But this is different. This is a very, I think, tailored individual part that is worth, you put a lot of time in, also having the mentor to look at it. I mean, this is not a section like Jen said that you can really come up with the 11th hour, for this particular kind of grants, it's really different than the other one. So I think just kind of echoing what everyone has said already, maybe just to emphasize this point in particular, like the portion of how important this is and how individual this part really is to every applicant.
Well, Peter, I'll ask you because that's a great point that you brought up. You've actually been very successful with clinical trials and translational science without having gone through a formal K award, and I think that's probably the hard way to do it. And it's so nice that we have all these grants, but you were very successful with it. If you had to go back and figure out if you were in the situation of somebody applying at the beginning, what would be important for your career development that you had to figure out on your own without a structured grant to help do so? What would you include in that career development plan that you find important in looking back?
Yeah, no, I mean, I wish I'd gone through this proper channel, Bill, because I think all the things that you mentioned, I mean, like you're talking about gaps. I mean, there are so many gaps. I mean, even how to write a grant to begin with. I mean, you actually, as you remember, helped me with a lot of this, Bill. I mean, kind of really, want to thank you this opportunity. Thank you for that. I think for me, grant writing is part of it, right? Also, like budgeting, like, I mean, we talk about the research strategy, but how to put a budget together, again, really, really important. I think often we don't give enough thoughts to this because the budget, once it's approved by the NIH, is what you have to go with, So I think it's again, what I remember is like, I mean, when you put the grant together, okay, like the budget, you kind of just come up with it, but you have to remember that once a grant is funded, that's what you're kind of, assigned to, So I think kind of budgeting, how to write a grant, how to communicate, for example, Bill, I mean, how to talk to your collaborator, how to, talk to your pre-award people, the whole concept of kind of submitting different cycles, how to resubmit. I have to learn all that. But I mean, this is even like way more basic than what you're talking about. I mean, this is just kind of really basic stuff, but I have to learn it by myself. I mean, you can do it, but I think it's just so much nicer to, to have, I think, formal mentorship. I mean, these are all gaps, like the gaps that you talked about, and this is, this is the basics. And of course, the other things like the actual science and the methodology in your field, I think these are the other things that you mentioned, Bill. But for me, I mean, just because I came in quite late to this, so I had to, I think to the people on the call, you're very lucky. I mean, all these grants have a limited, period that you can be part of. Once you miss that, then you got to go through my way, which I think it's just there's a lot more learning I think you can do in a structured manner, like I said, Bill, just the basics from it, apart from the science, part of it. So I think that's kind of my experience.
Thank you, Peter. I do want to acknowledge, I'm just quickly scanning the room, and there's some pretty senior investigators here, and I know some NIH, Tish is here. Any comments from any of the K12 leadership or Tish? I know you've given a great lecture on this. We're going to certainly open up for questions, and we want to answer people's questions, but I just did want to acknowledge there's a significant amount of expertise in this room and wanted to open up the floor.
Hey, Bill, this is Seppi. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Yes, sir. I'm in the car, so hopefully my reception is okay. But yeah, I just to reiterate, I think a couple of things have already been said, but can't be said enough. You mentioned, I think the two, I think really critical things are specificity, and then that you already mentioned, right? That if there's a whiff of genericness, that really comes through. So, I think like Peter just mentioned, grant writing. Well, of course, most people are going to need some skills in that. But if you want to indicate that, be specific if you can in terms of what materials or mentorship or things that you're going to seek out. And, many institutions have grant writing courses or seminars or whatnot. But the more specificity you can provide into exactly what you're going to do with that, I think is helpful, as with every element. The other thing is kind of cohesiveness, that it can really fit with your research program, but also what your mentors say in their letters, right? Everything has to hang together. If you're talking about in your career development, oh, I'm going to be meeting with my mentor, twice a week, but their letter says, oh, I'm going to sit with this person once a month. That's not cohesive. It doesn't tell the same story. So you really want to be sure that everything hangs together and complements each other in every other component of the grant as well. So your research plan is cohesive with your career development plan, is cohesive with your mentor letters, etc.
Sappy, I think those are both fantastic points. On your first point, I agree. I would go so far as to say, I was making a point of this a little bit before. If you're listing a course and it's if you list, oh, I need help with statistics, so I'm going to take statistics 401 class at USC where I am. That is by far not detailed enough. You need to explain what specific modeling you look to learn out of that class, whether it's general linear models or this type of analysis or that. And it's got to be involved in that class and how you're going to explain, how you're going to, relate it to your aims. So Seppi's example was grant writing. That's exactly right. Everybody can say grant writing. That's very genetic. You have to say, what your institution happens to offer, how you're going to take it, and what you're going to bring to your study. Likewise, with the point about the mentorship and the career development, all of these sections have to hang together, as Seppi said. There's a lot of good grants being put in. So anybody who puts one in and has the mentor saying one thing and the applicant saying another, it just shows that you didn't sit down those two people together and work this out. It's like having typos and spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes. There's reviewers who just won't put up with that. So consistency is super important. Thank you, Seppi. Other comments from faculty that are out in the crowd here?
Bill, I was going to add something here. So
Please.
I think every institution, they have some type of physician scientist training program, clinical translational science institute, and a lot of these things have been thought out as part of their grant mechanism in terms of how they submitted it to train future physician or surgeon scientists. So, one thing I just stress to the group, kind of seek out these entities at your academic institution and, find out what makes sense for your gap that you're trying to fill. Because odds are there's going to be something there for you that you can really benefit. It takes a little bit of research, but it's not that much. I mean, once you get, some emails out and you meet the right people, it can open up a lot of doors. We have this physician scientist incubator program that I've been hooking up our UE5 neurosurgeon scientists in, and it's quite beneficial. It's an incredible curriculum that's been established that can be catered to whatever your needs are.
Thanks, Kostas. Completely agree. We also want to make this very interactive. Please, let's have questions from any of the participants who have any questions on career development plan, specifically for one of the panelists in general, career development in general. Let's open up the floor for questions.
Dr. Mack, I had a question about coursework. This is Matthew Pease.
Yeah.
I feel like as a neurosurgeon with a practice, like I don't have a regular schedule. Taking a university course that's like Tuesday and Thursday afternoons is kind of a tough thing to do because things come up. Do the reviewers look favorably about online classes? I know someone who said they were going to try to do a master's and realized it was just a joke, and they actually got their K, but aren't coming close to getting a master's during their K. Like, how do neurosurgeons with unpredictable schedule handle coursework or classwork?
That's a great question. I can start out, then I want to defer to the other panelists because this is a tough question. I would say that first, with getting 50% time protected, the assumption is that that's 2.5 days a week, and that's a pretty significant amount of time. I think it's very reasonable to believe that a neurosurgeon can take a class that fits into that time in the proper way. On the flip side, you're spending a lot of time doing your research as well. So I think online classes are a very good idea. Seminars, on full-on online classes, I think it makes it easier and gives people more time. I guess again, I'm going to give the disclaimer that this is just my thinking. This is certainly not the groupthink of any review panel. I guess if everything was online and was fit into a schedule that looked like somebody was just trying to fit in the classes and not devote the time to them that were necessary, that might give me a little bit of pause. But it really depends on how it's explained and how it's constructed. I think online classes are absolutely fine. What do you, Kostas, Pete, Jan? What is your thinking?
Yeah, just quickly, I agree. I think the online options, Matt, could really work. I mean, I know you're at Indiana University, and again, you don't need to take, you need to take the course that makes sense for what your needs are. So, don't take the general course of the topic. Try to, get an area that focuses in that area that you really want to polish up, and odds are there's going to be something online that you can investigate and be part of for that.
And I think online has just become much more acceptable, desirable as time has gone by. I mean, it used to be if somebody suggested they would have online meetings with their mentor, that was just really frowned upon because you're not in close proximity. And I still believe direct contact is the best thing. But there are mentors, especially usually not the primary mentor, but there are mentors that people find across the country that are very, very helpful, and they have, online conversations and touch base in addition to face-to-face meetings with them. So I feel the same applies and is even less critical in coursework. I think it's more permissible to take those courses online than even meeting with the mentors.
So the K that I'm interested in doing is data science and computer science focused. And one of the things that I often find is that basic scientists don't quite understand, or the computer science realm is just a little bit different, where a lot of the online classes are actually better. University classes are too theoretical and they're just not practical for what I want to actually achieve. Is that reasonable to state something that is nicely worded in the grant? Like, I'm taking online classes because these are actually more practical versions of what my university will offer, or will that be viewed weirdly?
I would think that a review panel and everybody involved wants you to take the things that help you most get to where you need to get to. So sitting through Computer Science 101, if that is not going to be as desirable to you as Kostas said, being involved in an online class that hits exactly what you want, I would go with the thing that hits exactly what you want on your topic every time. But I'd be interested to hear what other people have to say about that.
Hey, this is Tish. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, thank you, Tish.
Hey, so I just wanted to say, and as like just a general rule, I really like that you just asked this question about like, is it okay to say this? Is it okay to say that? I think like the thing that I always am telling people when and that are writing all kinds of grants is that you're in control of the narrative and you just have to make it make sense, right? I want to take this online course and let me tell you in one sentence why this is going to make sense and is going to be the right thing for me to do. I think if you can control the narrative and really help people understand that everything you are putting together makes a lot of sense and it's all going to combine to like get you where you're trying to go. I think, don't be afraid to really spoon feed and articulate very carefully and thoroughly exactly why you're doing what you're doing and why you're making these choices and how it's going to help you. I think a lot of times people will come back, they'll get a summary statement, and they'll call us up and they'll be like, "Well, we got this comment, and people seem to be confused by this." And so I'll say, "Well, explain to me, like, well, what is this that you're trying to say?" And they'll tell me, and I'll say, "Well, did you write that down?" And they'll be like, "No," and I'll be like, "Write that." Like I'm so clear, and I'm so excited about what you just told me. You just have to spell it out for them. So don't be afraid to do that. And then of course go ask your mentors to read over it and see if you strayed too far off course or if what you said is too strongly worded or whatever or disrespectful or something. Just make sure that someone else reads it over. But don't be afraid to really control the story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, Matt, I think what you're saying is exactly right. And with what Tish added, you just can't assume people know why you're doing stuff. So if you say, "Oh, I'm going to take this online class," I don't know if you're taking it online because it's not offered at your institution or because you don't have the time because you're a neurosurgeon, or as you said, it's the perfect class for you and it has all the right, tools and techniques that you want to learn. Just articulate that, and I think you'll be in good shape. That's a great question. Other questions, please.
Thank you for answering.
So this is Brandon Luckywold. Thank you for having the panel tonight. Very much appreciate the information. Wanted to get thoughts on terms of that development portion of sharing at the national meetings, getting some outside mentorship and support, how you really phrase that in terms of like the K award application, and the value of having more clinical focused meetings like our national neurosurgical meetings versus more basic science component. How do you balance that in terms of sharing information, getting additional exposure as part of the overall training environment?
Yeah, and you've been great with kind of getting out there and collaborations. And well, what's your feeling on that?
You said Jen, right, Bill?
I did say Jen.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Um, I mean, I think just what Tish said, as long as you really spoon feed them and outline exactly why you think going to a clinical meeting is going to serve a purpose, who you could even say, oh, this is a clinical meeting for the society, and in 2027, the scientific program director is going to be X, Y, or Z, or these are the people that are going to be at the meeting. A lot of these meetings have side meetings, associated with them. And if you really spell out the key connections you hope to make and what you hope to accomplish at the meeting, or how early exposure to that meeting will later translate toward, furthering your career within a certain field, I think it's fine. I know Bill had mentioned in the slides you want to be careful about not tipping the scales too much, such that the majority of your plan is to, travel around to meetings. But I think that as long as you're balancing that with courses, getting the training you need in a particular technique, mentorship meetings, lectures, I think it's very reasonable to build that into your career development plan, but you have to explain the purpose of it and what you hope to accomplish by going to these meetings. But I think it's great to connect in person with other folks from around the country. And that's where you'll be able to foster relationships to join clinical networks or develop research collaborators, across the country. So I do think they're important.
Yeah, I would say especially Brandon, if you're doing something that's a multi-center trial and I mean, less likely for a K award, but and you're meeting up with collaborators at this time. This is super important. I think the gold standard is always going to be the mentorship that you get from your mentorship team. So this is always, all of these activities are going to be additive to that, right? Because it's a mentored career development award. And what we're really counting on is the expertise of the folks that you're training with. But I would say and most would advise and have seen in every one of these grants, there's some element of plugging in those ways. The question is, how far do you go on training and leadership and mentoring medical students? At the end of the day, it's a career development plan that focuses on your science. So that's where the money's got to be. But all these other pieces of it should support that. That's my opinion. Costas, Pete, I mean, any thoughts? This is it's opinion. That's what it is.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add too is we're now seeing at our meetings, and we've organized the Neurosurgeon Scientist Symposium at the CNS last year. We're going to have it this year, and then there's the AANS kind of surgeon scientist afternoon session. So these things are now available for you all, but and they're helpful because they introduce some of the programs that you're eligible to apply for, and you get to meet some of the people doing the research that you may be interested in and mentors that you can really learn from. I think that's probably the most valuable part of this is networking with some of the individuals in your area that you want to do research. So I think that's helpful to put that in there too, and just understand the culture of being a neurosurgeon scientist. But again, at the end of the day, the science you propose is important too. So, but I think this is just a part of that whole process.
And Brandon, you're actually asking a little bit about specific meetings. I do like to see that specific high level meeting that is very relevant to your science, whether it's neuron physiology or inflammatory mediators. If there's a meeting and you're plugging in and presenting your data at that type of place, I think that's a strength of the application. These are good questions. Other questions?
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Well, Bill, I'll just make one comment. Again,
Yeah.
this is I think independent maybe, but of the K pathway. But I think, maybe it's obvious to everyone. Like when I started, I think one important person was a program officer. Like I didn't really know a lot of the questions I was asked, for example. I think, like I've tried different, mechanisms of RFAs, and I think, some of the program officers are tremendously helpful, like liaisons at the NIH. They'll help to go over your application, my program officers spent a lot of time in reading the grant, giving me specific, kind of comments about the RFA. So I think really take advantage of that resource too. I know it's probably obvious to everyone here, but I just wanted to kind of bring it up as a personal experience. That was very helpful. I mean, especially when I got started.
Yeah, I think that goes a long way. I would echo what Peter says. A lot of times, even on these, I think Tish can correct me if I'm wrong, but the program officer, when you're talking about a career development award and plan, is actually the NINDS office as it is now, and it's Tish and her team who are probably the ones who would serve as the PO and take a look at this part of the grant after you got it back or when you're deciding on what to submit. I would tell you, so she can comment at that. I would tell you, I would use that resource, but I would use as many resources as you possibly have for a career development plan. This is not very specific to the details of your science. Peter, Kostas, any of your faculty can read a career development plan. And it's often times after your mentor reads it, you have somebody else read it that doesn't know where you're coming from, because that's what the reviewer is going to be like. And it's this section and the approach section, which is part of this, where applicants differentiate themselves. You all come from excellent institutions, and if you can put forth a section on the environment in your institution, you can put forth one where you're going to get a good score. presumably, if you're applying for a K award, you've done enough beforehand that your investigator score can be strong, or if it isn't, it can be strengthened by doing the right things and working with your mentor. But this is where the career development plan and the approach that goes along, this is where the applicants differentiate themselves. So I would have as many people look at this, critique it as possible beforehand. And I kind of mentioned Tish in her office. Maybe she can hit on that. I don't want to speak incorrectly about it.
No, I think you're correct. And our office is always happy to talk to you or to anyone at any time during the application process and afterward. And then we tag team with the subject matter experts. We've done a little bit of reorganization with a lot of the changes that are going on and the loss of staff. But we're still sort of partnering with the subject matter experts who can talk to you about the science, and we are happy to weigh in with all the advice that we have in our arsenal and all the experience that we have to help with anything other than the scientific aspect of your application. And I would also say, I don't want to talk at all about all the changes that are going on, but with these applications, everything, all the review going to the Center for Scientific Review now at NIH, I think it's even more important to make sure that you're like really like on it in terms of clarity and really telling your story, because all these applications historically that came to NINDS were going to NST1, and that was a very familiar group, and things are going to change, and we're not quite sure how it's all going to be organized at CSR, but I think now is even more important time probably to talk to us as you're preparing your application so that we can help you, sort of prepare best for the review, which may be a little bit different or composed of different kinds of people.
And we are, that's a great point. And there's nobody who knows exactly what's gonna occur, as Tish said, but their office obviously has more information than the rest of us. This is pertinent to K08s and K23s, and we didn't get into the difference about the exact differences between those. One is a more basic, and one is one that involves human tissue and clinical science. But this also applies to the K12 that we've talked about. This applies to, Kostas had brought up other mechanisms through neurosurgery. It's rare that a early stage investigator grant that is beyond a pilot grant doesn't ask for you for some kind of career development plan. And I think they're all the point of the career development plan is to make sure your career development progresses in the right way. So it's obviously by putting the right things on paper, you're telling who's ever evaluating that you're going to be doing the right things in practice. So I'd say this is pretty applicable to many awards. Any other questions from students, from residents, from faculty who are mentoring? I see we have a lot of folks online, so please feel free to ask any questions you have. So I'll ask another question of a couple of the panel members, and this is not an easy question. What do you find? What's most difficult about this? What's going to be the hang up for an applicant? Where are the quote unquote points going to be taken off? Where do you see the most deficiencies when you evaluate these types of career development plans? And we've probably hit on some of those areas. Kostas, you want to start?
Sure.
I don't want to put anyone on the spot here.
No, it's okay. Happy to discuss this. I think, one of the themes you keep hearing about is this has to be really specific to you. And I look at that when I read through the grant and then I get to the career development plan, I really want to see first of all, what the applicant is disclosing as a deficiency for them to learn and really improve on. And that may be difficult to articulate in certain instances. And I think if someone is very clear about that, as Tish mentioned, it becomes a much more personal career development plan that you can connect with. I mean, I think that's what we're all saying. We want to connect with the career development plan, knowing that it's specific to you and how you're going to get better with this grant. And when you don't get that connection, then the grant loses a little bit of its momentum and strength. So, that's why this section of the grant to me is probably equally important to the science, especially for a K award And then, even in the training grants, you have to have this part in there. Even for those applying for the UE5, we have the NSDP now for the residents. All that stuff's kind of in there because we want to see what you are going to propose to become better at during your research proposal.
And I can tell you, if your career development plan in any of these grant applications, but certainly the ones I've seen for these mechanisms, if it's not gap based, if one cannot characterize it by that exact term, that's a detriment. It needs to be gap based. And as Costas said, you just have to very clearly articulate it. You're not trying to trick anyone here and be clever and try and hide it's you want to put what are the gaps out there and how are you going to address them? That's what a training grant is. And I would use that terminology. I think it's effective.
How many gaps do people typically have?
I think it's dependent. Usually, I mean, people have three aims, whether there's three gaps or four or five things they're trying to figure out. They don't have to go one to one with the aims. But I would think again, I'm going to defer to the rest of the panel here. I would think I would want the applicant to be learning several things from this, whether it's techniques or theory or even some people do include a grant writing and development gap. I mean, a small one to focus on that. So my experience is it's usually somewhere in the 3 to 7 range, depending on how you break it up. Everybody does it differently. You could have a couple big gaps that you're trying to address, or you could have more sub aims, sub gap types of things. I guess if there was only one thing you really needed to learn, and it was an immense amount, and it would take this to get you there, that would be reasonable. Although I don't think we see that as much. Peter or Jen, what's your feeling on that?
I guess I just generated another question more than an answer, but how much do you think that the gaps have to, relate back to the aims? Like how tied together, in your experience, as a group, do you think they should be? Because I guess that also would relate to, the number of gaps that you have. And I think trying to make the career development plan cohesive with the aims. I was just sort of curious
I
from
think
thoughts from the panelists.
I think it's very elegant when the gaps can be either related back to the aims or will incorporate specific ones of those gaps relate to either all of the aims or certain ones of the aims. I just think it's nice when everything relates to each other and you could see how the career development is going to progress as each of these scientific aims are developed. And oftentimes people are able to describe different things that they will learn from each aim or different gaps. Then there's science where you can't split it out that well, and it just depends probably in your specific example whether they are discernible specific aims that have different techniques and technologies and concepts related, or it's very iterative and similar in the three. I mean, I think it's probably more stylistic. I like the former. I like relating it to the aims. Kostas, Peter, Seppi.
Bill, I think the other part, Kosa and Jen talked about, the importance, of course, of the career development part. For the science part, like you mentioned, I think like the approach is really the key. Because if you look at all these grants, whether it be the K or other mechanisms, where it separates is always where you lose points always on the approach. So I think that's always what separates, the grants. Just again, maybe obvious, but I think it's important to just reemphasize that it's really like the approach that separates the grants and where we lose points on the applications typically.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind as well is we talked about how having multiple mentors is important. Part of that may come down to a area in your research that you are just not up to speed with, that mentor will help you fulfill. Like, for example, let's say you're proposing something with a gem genetically engineered mouse model, and that's just not your focus. You bring on someone who's doing that work, they're one of your co-mentors, and you discuss that in your career development plan. I mean, there's so many things that you could kind of go forward with that, but it's just another aspect of you thinking through this new area that you're jumping into and who's going to support you and develop your pathway forward.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, we are coming up on the hour. I want to allow if anybody has any last comments or questions from the audience, happy to answer them. If not, I will thank the panelists. This flew by, and thanks for everybody else who participated, both from a audience standpoint of asking questions or giving input. I think this is really valuable to have this community input, and anybody who is on this and wants to reach out to any of the faculty or panelists, we're all more than willing to interact and engage with any questions or comments that you have. I don't know if Melanie's still on or Brigitte, but I think that concludes our panel session.
Yeah, thank you so much to Dr. Mack for his leadership and to all of you for attending. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.